breakfast puppies?
This podcast contains adult language and content and is meant for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, I'm Kevin Siembieda of Palladium Books, and you're listening to the Glitterbois.
Hey folks, it's the Glitterbois again, and we're back with another interview with everyone's favorite publisher of all things Palladium, Kevin.
I believe everyone's only publisher of all things Palladium.
It makes it real easy to say he's the favorite now, doesn't it?
This is true.
This episode, we're talking about the history of Beyond the Supernatural. So, Kevin, let's just break it down and get to brass tacks. Where did the idea for Beyond the Supernatural percolate in your brain?
So that's actually an easy one because it started percolating in Randy McCall's brain. Randy McCall was one of my regular gamers. I had met him, I think, through the Detroit Gaming Center and a pair of Canadian pals, Randy and Roger Cartier. And I was a guest at a small convention in Windsor because it's just across the river. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I started a friendship with Randy, and we started playing each other's games. And he's like, "Kev, I've got this great idea for a modern supernatural game, a horror game." And I said, "Well, let me hear him." And he was sort of a amateur writer. He liked horror. He was big into Call of Cthulhu and Lovecraft and the whole mythos. And he's a very sharp guy, very smart guy. Loves books, loves reading, and had done, I think, a short story or two for a couple of horror magazines. Mm-hmm. And he pitched me the idea for this horror book. And I always loved the supernatural and that kind of element myself from being a young kid. I read about Lemuria and Atlantis.
Oh, yeah.
There's some great TV shows back when I was growing up in the 60s, especially One Step Beyond, which was this kind of weird, eerie, real life, short little stories that had a very kind of Outer Limits or Twilight Zone kind of feel. But that always fascinated me, the fact that, okay, but these are supposedly true stories, ghosts and all kinds of different psychic phenomena and ESP stuff. And so I think that kind of primed me for this kind of thing. Plus, I was a big horror fan. I watched all kinds of horror movies. I loved the old Hammer movies and all the great old movies. I mean, Dracula, Frankenstein. I think, a lot of people in their memory, they're kind of cliche and they think they're kind of corny. But if you watch those first two, and some of the later stuff was, but if you watch the original Dracula, the original Frankenstein, it's pretty serious fare. Mm-hmm. And it's powerful stuff.
The Night Stalker.
Yeah. Yeah. The Night Stalker, one of my all-time favorites. I mean, again, I haven't seen it in a long time, so I don't know if it holds up.
It does. I only saw it for the first time in the last year, and it's good.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
The movie?
Yep.
Yeah, it's great, right?
We're going to do a TV show marathon soon too.
The TV show is nowhere near as good as the movie. There's a second Night Stalker movie as well. Mm-hmm. And it's good. It's not quite as good as that first one of the vampire. But yeah, the Night Stalker is fabulous. Mm-hmm. And Darren McGavin, I mean, the guy is phenomenal in it. In fact, you can see elements of Beyond the Supernatural
Yep.
from the Night Stalker. It's vivid in your mind. You just watched it, NPC. But, the fact that here's our hero, our protagonist, is this washed up reporter.
Yeah.
Who's trying to make his comeback. And he's the first guy to realize that this serial killer isn't human, that it's something different. And there's some great scenes. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's one of the very first modern representations of vampires. And it's done so well.
It's really good.
And nobody will believe him. And everyone poo-poos him, and it's like, you're crazy, you're drinking, you're going to ruin your career by trying to tell people it's vampires. And what's he do? He figures out what kills vampires and holds them at bay and stuff. And he decides he's got to go out and track this thing down and kill it before it can kill more people. And it's just your classic ordinary person thrown into this supernatural, horrific situation. And he decides to do something about it. And that's like the foundation of Beyond the Supernatural.
Yeah, Jacob has brought up Kolchak the Night Stalker so many times in previous discussions of Beyond the Supernatural, but it wasn't, unfortunately, Jacob, I can't attribute this to you.
No.
It wasn't until I was listening to another podcast with the RPG Nerds Variety Cast, and that guy Jason did a whole episode talking just about the movie The Night Stalker. And the more I'm listening to it, the more I'm like, okay, pause, watch movie, go back. And 100%, so much of that, I just kept thinking, okay, I can game that. Oh, I can game that too.
Yep.
Okay, I can totally game this.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So about what time did he approach you with the idea? Because I know in the history that you've been working on some things where it took a while to find a place in the production schedule to fit them and such. And so when did he come with you with the idea originally to how long did it take to actually get it to print and on the shelf?
It was, I want to say it was a year or two, because he was originally going to write it. I let him take a run at it. But the cool thing about it was we would talk about it all the time. He'd call me up and we'd meet at conventions, or, when he'd come to my weekly game, we would talk about it. And I loved where he was going. I loved a lot of the concepts. Really great stuff. I thought pretty groundbreaking stuff, with ley lines and the standing stones and megalithic structures and that whole thing. And because that's where it really came from. And Randy, like I said, he's a voracious reader and he's into research like I am. So he read like a frickin' 1,000 books as research for this project. And he turns in a manual. And I had read, I don't know, a couple hundred at that time, just to be up on everything so I'd be able to contribute if I had to. And he turned in his manuscript, and the basic concepts were there, but it wasn't taken far enough. Like the section on ley lines, I think, was like a page. He just didn't see where to take it to really make it something really strong. So I said, Randy, I'm going to take this and add to it and retool it. And he's like, yeah, go for it. And I did. And that's where I sat down and read another couple hundred books. I read around 400, 500 total. And everything just started to fall into place. And not only did it start to fall into place with this book, but the concept of ley lines and how pyramids could maybe control them and stuff, and these places of power, and the Bermuda Triangle and other similar triangles, because there's giant ley lines, started to lay the foundation for magic in Rifts. And I knew I was kicking ass when I had one of my employees at the time, Richard Burke. I said, Rich, read this section on magic for me for my manuscript and let me know what you think. And he reads it and he comes over to me and goes, Kev, not only is this great, but as far as I'm concerned, this is how magic works in the real world.
I was going to ask, like, when you read all these books, what would you say the percentages of fiction to what people who go into a metaphysical store would buy, or an ancient history store? What's your ratio when you pull something like that together?
As far as the research books?
Yeah.
I would say 95% is, real historical or, new age stuff. It's, I mean, I read tons of books on mythology and supernatural, superstitions, witchcraft, psychic phenomenon. In fact, the Time Life series on, I forget what the heck they called it, on psychic abilities, the paranormal, I guess it was. fabulous. It's just a fabulous resource. Whoever wrote those did an amazing job, because they're much more concise than some other books. You get a whole book on the subject, and sometimes they kind of ramble or go off on things or cover stuff that you're like, it's interesting, but I can't use it in a game.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of boil it all down. You kind of like let it seep into you and think about it, and you turn it into this fictional work.
So, like NPC was talking about before we started on the air, Beyond the Supernatural is kind of like my bag as far as local subject matter expertise. And I got my hands on Beyond the Supernatural shortly after it originally came out. And having grown up with, even before I had gotten my hands on it, I had read a large chunk of Carlos Castaneda books and Chariots of the Gods, and that Time Life collection you're talking about. You mean the one that's sitting back at home on my bookshelf? I'm missing two. Yeah. I'm missing two books, but the rest is complete. So I was primed and like a huge fan of Kolchak the Night Stalker growing up, and so I hit this book, and I was like, even as someone who is in their middle teens at about that point, I was going through it and going, oh, I recognize that. Oh, I know where that's coming from. I mean, I wonder if this is from X. And I loved how you distilled the core concepts down and yet still managed to play with them so they're recognizable. It feels like so much of Beyond the Supernatural feels like this distillation of the collective unconsciousness coming at the end of the New Age period in the United States. And it's just absolutely perfect. It's this perfect running the gauntlet right before X-Files comes out and adds conspiracy theories and sci-fi to your horror as a standard. And it's absolutely perfect. My question was, how well was it actually received when it was published?
It was very well received. I mean, it wasn't a gigantic mega hit like Ninja Turtles or Robotech or Riffs, but it did really well. I think I printed 6,000 copies, and we sold out in like a year. And I printed another 6,000, and that sold out in like a year and a half. People really liked it. It did very well.
It also seems like you even mentioned it, and NPC mentioned it, where it seems to be kind of the point in the Palladium publishing timeline where some of these ideas that have come from fantasy and heroes and stuff start being slightly pulled together. And it's like you see you never really use the word multiverse, but you see the first inklings of not even the idea, but that tickle in the back of the head.
Excuse me, Jacob. Excuse me. It's Megaverse.
Megaverse. Sorry.
I'm glad you did it because I was about to, because I'm the one who always does that.
Now you don't have to feel alone. You're fired.
And thanks for joining us, everybody.
From the very beginning, I wanted to do a game system that could incorporate everything, that would allow you to fairly seamlessly move from one genre to the next. And so that was always in the back of my mind, and we just didn't have the finances when we first started to do something really major. So I don't think people really started to notice it until around Beyond the Supernatural, because now they're like, oh yeah, PPE applies here and there, and ISP and this and that, and I think a lot of the threads of horror and the supernatural started to come together with these unique heroes, whether they're ordinary people or superheroes or whatever. And so I think that was that. And I think as far as like the supernatural interest in the supernatural, I think I just tapped into something in the zeitgeist, Randy and I, because like you said, a few years later, the X-Files comes out and there's some other stuff that came out. And it's just like, I think just we were ready for that kind of setting, and it hit a nerve, and people loved it, and people have continued to enjoy it for decades now.
So this actually leads me to a question that we should probably define. So folks who are listening to this, who may be familiar with certain properties of the Palladium system, of the Megaverse, but not beyond the supernatural, might not really know what this game is really about. So what is the expected default? We're writing this book to allow this adventure. Like, what is the party template? What is the adventure that they're going on in Beyond the Supernatural?
So the basic concept is it's our world just as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
So your everyday world. However, even though the authorities and academia and science says the supernatural is not real, ghosts aren't real, aliens aren't real, werewolves aren't real, all this stuff is just, superstition and hysteria, every excuse they can find. You, the player, knows it's real because you probably experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
And after having experienced it, you become someone who wants to go out and confront these things, because there are evil supernatural beings that are tormenting people, that are causing problem. There's gremlins, and there's all kinds of strange demonic creatures, dreamweaver spiders, and all kinds of hideous things. And you're much like Kolchak in the Night Stalker. You're aware of this because you've seen it, or you're a psychic. You've developed psychic abilities. And again, nobody believes you, but you can sense these things or see these things when other people can't. And you go out to battle these secret dark forces in sort of a secret war in our modern setting. And one of the fun, tricky things with the Beyond the Supernatural setting is that, unlike a fantasy game or a post-apocalyptic game, and as a game master who runs these games, I find it funny because you can see the players kind of struggling with, well, I can't just kick in the door, and because that's breaking entry.
Exactly.
I can't rough up the priest, who I suspect is actually a vampire or a minion of some horrible demon, or is a witch or some other terrible thing. And, you got to play smart. You got to make sure you're not breaking the law. I mean, otherwise you're going to end up in an insane asylum or a prison. I mean, you come in, the police come in, and they're like, "Oh my God, you just drove a stake through that man's heart," and you started.
That is bad.
He was really a vampire, and I had to do it because he was causing all these problems. And they're like, "You're crazy. You're a crazy person." They're going to cuff you, and you're going to be locked away in an insane asylum for the rest of your freaking life. So you got to play smart. You got to play careful. It adds a new dimension to it because you can't just, like I said, be the swashbuckling, guy. You've got to be careful. You got to be smart. You got to kind of work on the down low. You're probably part of a secret organization like the Laszlo Agency, or your own small independent group. And most people are going to look at you as a wacko, as someone who believes in ghosts and monsters, or thinks they're psychic and can see auras when you really can.
Yeah.
And it's a fun, kind of dark conspiracy kind of feel to it. It adds a whole new dimension.
It's interesting hearing you talk about that and then talking about the zeitgeist, because I think it was, I want to say 3-4 years later, that something very similar happened with White Wolf, where you could play as an ordinary person. Now the systems are wildly different, but it was all about finding the other world as a normal person and the parts you take in that. And
in the early 90s, White Wolf came out. The first real step across the line, other than some tangential mentions, was the Year of the Hunter.
Yeah.
Which
which was just a small source book, if I remember correctly.
Well,
Initially,
there was the Year of and it spun into supplements for each of their major game lines.
yeah.
One thing I will say is that if you look at the material from there, at least they were dealing with some of the same source material as Kevin was. Perhaps more.
uh-huh.
Well, come on. The next thing you know, you're immersed in their world of darkness,
Yeah.
which is great. And, they're dealing. Their focus is more on vampires.
Yep.
But they touched upon magic and werewolves and other things as well. It went on to be hugely popular.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of two sides. There, to a certain extent, it's different sides of the same coin. To a certain extent, where the focus of Beyond the Supernatural is you're pretty darn close. To the regular person on the street, whereas White Wolf's approach has always been, you're the monster.
Yeah, until you get to things like Hunter later on.
Until you get Hunter, which was like literally their second to last series they did before they rebooted the entire system.
Yeah. I do remember playing, I don't remember what game it was. It was some 90s horror investigation game that I don't remember much of anything about it. And I remember it had the same template, exactly what you were saying, Kevin. We can't kill this person because we don't know. We have to wait until we absolutely 100% are positive that this guy is a monster, and then we can kill him. But we got to follow all the laws. We can't get caught. We can't get breaking and entering. So finally, we fight the vampire. We realize he's a vampire, and we kill the vampire. Well, in this guy's setting, vampires, when they die, just become human again. So now we have a human corpse.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
We're fucked.
Yeah, I mean, Palladium's work on Beyond the Supernatural front ran because there had been horror games prior to Palladium. I mean, there's been Call of Cthulhu, one of the super earliest horror games. There were some other trickles in there. D&D even tipped its toe in there with originally Castle Ravenloft. But I believe Beyond the Supernatural was originally published in 88.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, predates a lot of it.
And then there was this kind of trough, and then in the early 90s we start seeing White Wolf. We start seeing Cult has always been clipping along in the background because Cult's this weird European game that's changed hands and IPs. But Kevin and Palladium were front running the horror genre, and specifically the human-centric horror genre resurgence that we saw in the 90s. And in some ways, I mean, like, I'm going to go out on a limb here and fanboy a little bit. Did it better for the human-centric approach to horror than a lot of games did until the end of the 90s, when we started seeing some really good stuff with the earliest iterations of storytelling-based games.
Yeah.
I have a couple technical questions. It really felt like, speaking mechanically rather than conceptually, you really started to put some really solid mechanics around psionics and such, and it's such a big part of the system. Was that just an evolution of the stuff you'd been working on with the original Palladium Fantasy and Heroes, and you just got the chance to finally bring it together and make a more concise model, or how did that happen?
So first of all, I want to thank you for the high praise. I appreciate it. I'm really proud of the books we create and the worlds we create.
And thanks for making them.
Well, you're very welcome. We always put our hearts and souls into these things. And so to answer your question, Jacob, the way I approach a game is I start with the setting and the characters, and I try to decide who are going to be the heroes, i.e. the player characters, who's going to be the villains, how does this fit in the setting, how do we make it work, how do we make it feel plausible, in what kind of a setting. And then I I try to build mechanics that help weave it all together and make those characters and concepts and villains possible. So it was a natural progression of the scientific abilities that already appeared, but now I'm tailoring them to our modern world. I'm developing them further in this setting, and I wanted to have a more tangible, realistic feel about it. And that's where it kind of also weaves into magic and places of power, where maybe your psychic abilities are also enhanced. And how do you do magic in the modern world, which was tricky. I think we didn't really successfully tackle that until Beyond the Supernatural second edition. But all those things were part of how I looked at the setting, and how can I give the players the powers and abilities that will be fun to play, because that's also the other thing. I think sometimes game designers forget about the fun aspect.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for a wow factor and fun. What makes this fun? Because you could do something that's really technically astute and feels very real, but if it's dull and boring and doesn't go anywhere, who gives a shit? It's got to be fun. It's just, you got to have characters that you enjoy playing. And I think that human aspect you mentioned, it comes from the fact that I like to have that humanness, that humanity in every game I do, whether it's Robotech, whether it's space opera, whether it's riffs, Beyond the Supernatural, superheroes. It's, we love stories because of the characters and their journey through whatever it is. And you're playing those characters. So I want to empower the players to make these really cool characters that are going to be memorable and fun to play.
I think we've remarked on almost every show that we do that one of the great magics of Palladium is the fact that a bog standard human features in every setting and is very playable and can stand proud with baby dragons, elder gods, Ferrotex, Glitterbois.
Yeah, and be interesting and
be interesting and compelling. Yeah.
Well, that's an idea, that's the plan.
This is one of the ones where I was trying to track it down ahead of this episode, and I just did not manage to get around to it. Is Beyond the Supernatural the first time you introduced horror factor as a mechanic?
Yes. Yep.
For something that you literally sum up in the book in 3 paragraphs, it is one of the more solid horror-based, the effects of terror that I've seen in a role-playing game. It's you keep what triggers it broad without overly defining it, so you don't have people trying to rationalize their way out of having to do a horror check because it's not overly stringent what makes or doesn't make a horror check. It's a straightforward saving throw. It has some concrete mechanical effects, but also it has long-lasting effects as well that aren't like I've seen in other gaming systems where if you fail your equivalent to a horror check, it's guaranteed long-term crippling necessarily. You may come out of it a scarred alcoholic, but it's not necessarily something that's going to immediately kick your character to the curb as a functional character, which has happened in other horror settings.
Yeah.
Well, and that was very deliberate for precisely that reason. I love H.P. Lovecraft. I know the game is hugely popular. And has been in every iteration for like 40 freaking years. And that's awesome. But one of the things that bugged me was at the end of it, your hero's likely to come out just, spending the rest of his life in an insane asylum.
Yeah.
And I get it from a horror novel point of view, but it's not real playable and it's not real fun.
Oh, yeah.
So I wanted to have horror that had an impact and was important, but didn't necessarily leave you disabled for the rest of your life or drooling,
gibbering.
And also, I like the horror factor checks because, again, it's simple.
Mhm.
It does a thing or it doesn't do a thing. It might have some long-term effects, might not. But in the end, it's a simple check, and then we move on. Because as opposed to something like building up sanity points, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, counting points on a sheet of paper has never been scary to me. I have never experienced fear
Yeah.
from sanity points.
Well, yeah. And I also like the variations in it. Like in a lot of systems, it's you have suffered horror. You will now run screaming.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is your response. So
Yeah.
levels, subtlety.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, again, I really think these things through, and I'm always looking to different ways I can bring the most visceral and fun experience to the players.
Okay. Here's a question. I'm going to forward. Actually, this is actually an amalgamation of like 4 different questions, but they all sort of swarm into one thing.
Yep.
Where did Victor Laszlo come from on the history of inspiration throughout the Palladium story?
Yeah. Who is Victor Laszlo?
Did he come before the game? Was he after the game? Where did the society come from?
Yeah.
So Victor Laszlo came first. I just thought it'd be cool to have a psychic investigator that would be sort of our voice and who sets the stage. Aaron Tarn kind of does a similar thing with riffs. I just thought he would be this great character to have as sort of like the voice of reason, especially to the people who deny these things exist. And he helps define what's going on. I think he kind of is an archetype for who the players will become in a way. And then the Laszlo Society. So Victor Laszlo in the game, he's this great sage-like psychic investigator of all these big theories. He was kind of inspired by real life characters like, oh my God, why can't I think of his name? The famous the famous UFO guy that Spielberg used as inspiration. Yeah. Hynek, Alan J. Hynek.
Yep.
Was one. And then Jacques Vallée was another. He was kind of coming up at that time in the whole paranormal UFO theory conspiracist guys at the time.
Yep.
And I liked that kind of feel. I mean, also Ivan T. Sanderson, who was a cryptozoologist and looked into the abominable snowman and Bigfoot and those kind of things. And those were a couple early books that I really enjoyed when I was in my preteens and teens. So I wanted to have sort of that kind of character to set the stage. And then Victor Laszlo mysteriously disappears. And the Laszlo Society kind of forms because without him, there's this vacuum, and there's all these true believers who kind of followed Victor Laszlo and his theories and philosophies. And so then the Laszlo Agency comes to kind of carry on his legacy. And as for the name Victor Laszlo, I never realized it until one day I'm rewatching one of my favorite movies, which is Casablanca with
I was going to ask.
Yeah.
And, this character comes in and it's Victor Laszlo. And I'm like, oh no, I subconsciously stole it. I love that freaking movie. And it never dawned on me until I'm watching it one day. And I'm like, Victor Laszlo? That can't be right.
That's all right. I think it was Heinlein that said you just file off the serial numbers, you move it across state lines, and it's yours.
Yes.
There you go.
Because I was actually wondering that because, like, probably mid-90s, in one of the Beyond the Supernatural groups I was playing at, I had a film studies major as a player. And when he came across the fact there was a character named Victor Laszlo, we actually had to impose a house rule that whenever he snuck in a Casablanca line or reference, he had to take a horror check. It was the only way we could stop him.
This is how you control the problem.
That's funny.
So, art.
I like art.
Oh my God, that cover.
The cover, first of all, I mean, both the first edition and second edition, I will say I'm kind of a first edition guy myself, but
It's a Corbin piece.
Well, here's the thing: we're all here. We all own them both.
yes,
I mean,
possibly more than one.
Well, no slight against John Zalesnik, who did the second cover.
Mhm.
Oh
but
yeah,
the Beyond the Supernatural first edition cover by Richard Corbin.
Mhm.
I mean, it was a masterpiece. Corbin really nailed it. He really got what I was looking for. And it's absolutely perfect. He had sent me two watercolor concept sketches. And one was much more understated, where the creature was kind of in the background and kind of looking like it's going to attack, and our heroes don't even know it's there.
Mhm.
And then this one where the girl's clutching the book and the creature is attacking. And I said, that's the one, Rich, you nailed it.
yeah.
And then prior to that, I mean, I had to explain, give a little idea about what the game was, what we were looking for. And so at the time, a lot of people aren't familiar with Richard Corbin these days, which is a shame.
Yeah.
Because the guy was an artistic genius. And he started out doing a lot of independent adult type books.
Yeah.
And so he had, in fact, he's most famous, like people often are like, I don't know who Richard Corbin is until I say, well, he was a big part of the original heavy metal movie then. And then they go, oh, wow, Richard Corbin.
Yep.
And so Richard was like famous for doing, these men with, well endowed, and women super well endowed, where they would have literally watermelon breasts
Yeah.
Mhm.
that looked like missiles and looked like watermelons with skin over them. And I'm like, Rich, this is like a PG-13 kind of soft R, and we can't have, women with big ones. And, can I get you to do it? I felt really funny because that was like his trademark at the
Yeah.
time.
Right.
That was his thing.
And I felt really funny art directing Richard Corbin to give me a woman with like natural looking breasts and figure. And when he sent it in, I'm like, oh, we did it. He nailed it. It's perfect. He can draw ordinary looking women who are still attractive. So that was pretty cool. And I love that piece so much. It was one of the first original covers that I purchased. And that's an interesting story because Richard, sweet guy, I ranted and raved about the cover, and I said, man, I'd love to buy it, but I don't think I can afford it. And I had no idea what he was getting, and I found out he was getting like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 for an original painting at that time. And I'm like, yikes, I can't do that. And he goes, well, what can you do? And I said, I was thinking more like 1,000 or 1,200. And he's like, $1,200, you got it. Oh, fantastic. And he had an agent who was handling all this. So he said, yep, just call my agent, tell him we had this talk, and you can get the cover. So I call the agent. The agent's like, $1,200? No way. No way at all. It's 3,000 is the best I can do. 3,500 would be better. And I call up Rich, and I'm like, so Rich, thanks, you're so kind, but your agent said, he couldn't take less than 3, and I just can't swing it. But thank you so much for even considering selling it to me. And he said, what?
He was not a small person. Like if you've ever seen his own study, like he had some muscle himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he says, I'm going to talk to him tonight. You call the agent tomorrow. And so I call the agent, and the agent is not happy. Because, I'm sure he gets a cut out of this, right?
Yeah.
And so he tries to talk me into 2, that the best he can do. I know Richard said 12, but, 2 is the lowest we can go. I call up Rich again, and I said, hey, and he's like, the painting will be in the mail. Send me a check for $1,200.
Now he gets
I
nothing.
got the painting before he got the check. And then because Rich is such a sweetheart, like a week later, I get this 9x12 envelope, and I open it up, and there's no letter, no nothing, and it's the 2 watercolor concept.
Oh.
And they're rough, but geez, the Richard Corbin, watercolors. And I call up Richard, and I'm like, Rich, I got this in the mail, and I could barely afford that painting. I can't afford these two, man. And he's like, Kevin, you loved it so much. I want you to have them. What a sweet guy, right?
Yeah.
Amazing story. A great guy. It was really nice working with him. I kind of wanted to work with him more, but somehow it just never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was funny because a lot of these guys, we become really tight. We talk a lot about all kinds of stuff. And with me and Richard, it was mostly, there was a little bit of chit chat, but it was mostly just, down to brass tacks business. And I mean, he was like 10 or 12 years older than me, I think. And we didn't seem to have a lot in common. And it was very basic conversations. And I was also working with Stephen Bissett to do the interior art, a lot of the interior art. And Stephen calls me up, and Stephen and I hit it off. We're just like, oh, man, this is great. And I think Stephen was kind of like in between my age and Richard's age, and was a top comic book professional at the time. He was, the new hot artist on Swamp Thing after Bernie Wrightson. And Stephen calls me one day, we're chit-chatting. He says, how about that Richard Corbin? Isn't he great? And I'm like, yeah, he sure is. He goes, I call him up. We talk for hours. And I'm like, oh, really? We talked for minutes.
So this Richard Corbin piece, I got to say for a moment, I love it. I love it so much.
Yes.
There's two specific components about it that I love the most. One, I like that the monster is like this semi-featureless, amorphous thing. It's not like I'm the werewolf, boogity boogity boo.
Yeah.
It is this horrific thing from the confines of a crazy person's imagination, and it's trying to kill you. And I love that. But my favorite thing, the guy with the submachine gun.
Yeah.
The look on his face, it's chef's kiss. It is beautiful. That is Ed. Oh shit.
That is the encapsulation of someone who has failed their horror factor check in this game.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily going to be at the top of your game, but you're not totally catatonic either. Yep. The one thing on both covers, both first edition and second edition, one of the things I love about both is the fact they set the tone for the game. You look at them, and it is not you standing astride a fallen supernatural entity or, something like that. It is one monster who clearly has the upper hand against this group of people who look like ordinary people, and it sets the tone for what Beyond the Supernatural is so perfectly. And even the second edition cover does that.
I agree with both of you. One of the things that I adore, NPC, I agree with you, is the look on, especially the guy with the submachine gun space. I mean, it's just, because, you see a lot. I'm a comic book guy, and on comic book covers, they're hardly ever horrified. It's a superhero, even if it's an ordinary person with a club or a stake and a hammer. I mean, they're just like, oh, I'm tough mother, and I'm going to kill this thing. And in this, it's like, holy crap, what have we gotten ourselves into? What is this thing?
We talk about that quite often. What is it? The constipated leap, where they're like,
yeah. This guy's he's my favorite.
Yeah, I think my dad said it best when he was describing Corbin. He said, the men are men, the women are women, and the monsters are monsters.
Yep. What was it like? Because Stephen Bissett also contributed art to Beyond the Supernatural. What was that like working with it? Because if I have my timeline correct, he'd already started art for Swamp Thing at this point.
Oh yeah.
And so, like, not necessarily a small catch. I mean,
not at the time, certainly.
Yeah, because you're talking about someone who, in so many ways, is credited with one of the periods of redefinition of comic book art. How did you get that, and what was that like working with?
I honestly don't remember how we reached out to Stephen Bissett, but probably my typical, hey, Al, I would really love to have Stephen Bissett do art. Can you track him down for me? And this is before computers were a big deal, and you couldn't just Google people. And Al's always able to somehow find these guys' contact information, and he gave it to me, and I called up Bissett and I explained what we were doing, and he was into it because, he's a horror guy. He likes doing horror and monsters, and I'm like, so yeah, I mean, I'd love for you to design a bunch of these creatures. I said, I don't need you to like write them up or anything. I just need you to do a bunch of cool creature art that's not your typical werewolf vampire kind of thing. And I think I gave him a couple ideas here and there for like the Sawookie and some other stuff. And I'm like, yeah, so Stephen, what will this cost me? And he was a big time guy, and we couldn't really afford his prices. So I said, well, what if I paid you like a flat $100 for a full page of art and gave you a percentage of the book? And he said, you know what, Kev? I've done a couple of deals like that, and they haven't gone very well, but I like you. I trust you. Let's do it. And years later, he's like, Kev, you're one of the very few people who consistently send me a check. Nowadays, things are clearly, the game is petering out, and that check isn't like a couple $1,000. It's $59.33, but that check is still in the mail. And he goes, I really appreciate that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we've talked in the past about the importance of your relationship with the artists and fulfilling your contractual obligations, which
just being a person of
can
word.
be hit and miss in the industry. And
well, and the thing is, I think with my art background, I mean, so first of all, as a comic book guy, I was following Swamp Thing and a bunch of stuff, and I thought he was an art god, and I respected and appreciated him, and I treat all my artists with the respect that they deserve, and they appreciate that, and when you treat someone well and give them a fair pay, you're going to get the best work out of it. And I mean, also, I gave him a lot of creative freedom.
Yeah.
And bang, man, he just came out with some amazing creature designs, and it was awesome. Even his werewolf is amazing, and the creature the werewolf's fighting is some, who knows what the hell that is, but it's awesome.
His art defines that book for me on the inside. It gives me that same feeling that I got as a child or a tween reading the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books. I don't know if you've ever seen those.
Yeah.
But the first time those books came around, they had this art in them that was simplistically terrible or terrifying. It wasn't super detailed. It was just like a clever use of shadows and perspective. But that stuff, the art in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, traumatized all of Gen X. And, and looking at this book, looking at the art in here, I'm like, getting a little bit of a flashback.
Funny.
Getting those feelers again.
Yep.
So when it comes to Beyond the Supernatural, what, you came out with the original book. It's had a couple editions over the years. Not editions, but additional books over the years.
Runs, yep.
And then you rolled into second edition. What made you decide to revisit it and go for second edition?
Well, I always loved Beyond the Supernatural. It's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite go-to games to run, especially at conventions. Because, again, it's just something that people can immediately identify with.
Mm-hmm.
We've all seen horror movies and read Stephen King and other books, and we all know what it's like to be walking down a dark street and hear a strange noise and don't see something that you expect to see, and it's awesome. So and I felt like there was more to be done with Beyond the Supernatural. And then the other thing was, a couple of people had kind of challenged me with the original edition, because the original edition immediately had magic in it.
Mm-hmm.
And while the magic was really good and introduced ley lines and places of powers and nexus points and that kind of thing, they raised a good point of, well, if magic is real and psionics is real, why can't I prove they're real by, walking into a scientist lab or a police station and, bursting into flames, or, picking them up telekinetically and spinning them around, or casting this magic spell or that magic spell. And my reaction was, damn, they're right. So how can I make this work without that? How do I explain this? How can we set up magic and psionics in such a way that it's still unprovable that it's real? And that's where I came up with the system that's in this book. And then we focus mainly on psychics, because I had originally planned on doing the magic book and the monster book shortly after this. And then all kinds of things happened to make that not happen. But people want it desperately, and I plan on doing it next year. It's going to be my top priority to do those two books, Beyond Arcanum and Tomes Grotesque.
Oh, I like that.
So,
I know that I can arrange for a 20-person crew to come out to Michigan and deep clean the warehouse if it guarantees a release date for a book. They will even pay for their own plane tickets.
So I should explain how I did that with second edition. What I did was that psychic abilities are sort of man's evolved defense against the supernatural. Now, ironically, that evolution was more prominent and obvious in more primitive times, because you had your shaman or your medicine man, et cetera, your seer, your sage, your oracle, and they knew how to battle the supernatural stuff. And that's one of the premises in this, is that, and the original, is that modern man has forgotten that, because we're so tethered to science and reason that we've decided none of this stuff is real. Magic's not real. Psychic abilities aren't real. Certainly the monsters aren't real. So it's that disbelief that is giving monsters and the supernatural more power over us, because we're denying them. And even when, police or whoever do battle against them, they kind of convince themselves that it couldn't have been what I just thought I fought, or it was that, but I must never speak of this because people will look at me like I'm a freaking lunatic. And what helps propagate that is the fact that the supernatural beings, their presence on Earth is more almost like an avatar or some kind of construction. They have to root themselves to our planet. So they send part of their life essence to our world, and then they construct a body that may look like a serpent or a blob or some hideous creature, like on the covers. But when you kill it, when you inflict enough SDC and hit point damage, and you kill its physical form, it dissipates. It turns into flies or gnats or worms or ash or bubbles that float away or fly away or seep into the earth. It turns into some goo that just, and it's gone. And so there's no physical proof. So that's great. And then same thing with the psionics and magical work in a very similar way, where the level of your ability, the power of your psionic abilities or magic depends on the power level of the supernatural being or beings you face. So, and then, so like in the case of the psychic, you can go in at the police station and swear upside and down ways what happened. And they say, well, prove to me you're a psychic. And you can make that quarter or nickel wobble, or maybe even spin for a couple seconds. And they're like, yeah, man, I've seen stage magicians do better
they
than
do
this.
it with mirrors.
Yeah.
But if you're fighting a greater supernatural being, you lift up that couch and hurl it at the creature. That's how the proximity to power mechanic works. And it's funny. So it's a really core feature in Beyond the Supernatural second edition. And it's only like the whole description is only like 4 pages long in the book. It took me 2 months to hammer it out and write it in a way that I thought was concise and clear. 2 months for 4 pages. I mean, that's where, people often think, well, it's a role-playing game. You sit down and you write it. And I help propagate, I think, some of it's easy to write this shit because I'll talk about, this book I wrote in 3.5 weeks.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And this was in 5 weeks, and this was in 8 weeks. And then it's like sometimes 4 lousy pages takes 2 months.
Yeah.
It's not always, fast and easy, or, half or 2/3 of the book comes pretty quick and smooth. But then that last quarter or that first quarter of the book took forever. Sometimes it's putting the concepts down, or you have the concepts, and now how do you deliver them in the right way? And, sometimes it's, the second draft and you're like, yes, it's magic. And then other times it's like, your 8th draft, you're going, I think this is better than the last 3. It's tough. It takes time.
I got to give kudos. That proximity to power mechanic is perfect for the setting. It covers, it solves so many problems that investigative horror doesn't ever quite manage to do in many other games without making characters gods. What it gives characters that power and that ability to have fun doing awesome things, but only at certain times. It's wonderful, because once that proximity is removed, they're shrunk down to their level, and they got to figure out what to do.
Spin the coin.
But it makes boss fights awesome, and that it's comic book magic right there.
And it really
it is. If I do say so myself.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very proud of that. It took a lot, and it took 2 months for me to write it in the way I wanted it to be clear and good, and I delivered because everyone gets it. But I was kicking that around for probably a flipping year or two. How am I going to do this? I could do this. Nah, that doesn't quite work. How about this? Nah, that's better. But it was just. I like to say often that things percolate in the back of my head.
Let the hindbrain work on it
for a long time.
Yeah, I often find that it's flavors and large concepts come so easy. Let me paint that picture. Okay, now it's time to weave the canvas and make a paintbrush. Fuck.
Yeah.
It's the flavor text is always. We'll set the stage, and that just comes to me, and then it's like, all right, now how do I make this internally consistent? And I'll do just that. Just keep chewing it, put it away, do something else, chew it, and the back of my head's just grinding away at it. Sometimes that's just what it takes. But one of the things I love about this way of the proximity to power is the internal logic of it. Because when you think of what we consider the normative world, and then you have an aberration in that normative world. And it's not just an aberration as in outside the norm, it's an aberration to the natural order. And around the natural order, things leak.
Right.
So, when looked through that lens, the logic is there. And that's what I love about stuff like that.
Well, that's what I love doing. I love to take. So when people come up to me and say, I love your games because they're so realistic, I love that compliment because they're just so wrong.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing realistic in here at all. But I accomplished making it feel so plausible and making it feel this must be the way it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it feels real. It feels realistic. And I love that. And that's part of the thing is making the stuff feel plausible. Again, this isn't to slam D&D or any game system, but one of the things that drove me crazy with original D&D was the mage.
Mm-hmm.
And so the mage who casts these spells all the flipping time, he can't remember them after he casts it.
Yeah.
He's got to have it written down in a book, and then it disappears, and it just felt so convoluted, and it felt like an obvious game mechanic, which it was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. I mean, it grew out of it grew out of miniature games where they have hard and fast rules, and you just accepted, well, this is the rule, and this is what happens.
Mhm.
But in a storytelling game, I felt like it needed to fit the world. I felt like it needed to feel plausible, and you look at this and go, oh, I get how that works. Even though if you really think about it, it's all hogwash.
Right.
It's just all, cool ideas woven together in a nice way,
Mhm.
but it's not real. So it can't be realistic, but it does have that plausible feel, and your character feels like it fits in the world and he fits in the world with it. And I love that. I love doing that.
And I mean this as a compliment. It might be hogwash, but it's internally consistent hogwash, which is something that whatever your medium of expression is, having that internal consistency is what takes it to a whole nother level. Whether you're writing a novel, whether you're making a role-playing game, whether you're doing a movie, if you look at the things that are considered luminaries of that particular practice, oftentimes it's the internal consistency. You can talk about Citizen Kane and how the internal consistency of camera shots, to the internal consistency of the Amber series of novels, to the internal consistency of the magic system of Beyond the Supernatural.
Hold on.
I knew it.
You did not just claim Amber was internally consistent.
Okay, folks, I may have intentionally done a little bit of a troll on NPC there because I know his feelings on the topic.
Good stories, but Zelazny ass pulled almost every other page.
Yes. 100%.
Right. Anyway.
So out of both editions, like you had great art in the books, you introduced what would be some of the most easy to point to starting seeds of the Megaverse, even though that might not have been where your mind was at the time. As far as the whole concept of the Megaverse, you obviously had the concept of a more universal role-playing mechanic system. What do you personally feel your biggest pride and joy out of the Beyond the Supernatural creation process? Was it, what element do you sit back and go, this is the thing that I'm probably the most proud of?
Oh, that's a tough one. It's easier if I can divide it between first edition and second edition.
Please
go
do.
ahead.
Because I think in first edition, it's ley lines and nexus points and how magic works in the so-called real world. And then in second edition, it's the proximity equals power rule. I mean, that and the fact that the creatures just kind of disperse and vanish with a horror element, a horror flair, because they turn into bugs or ants or spiders or whatever the hell.
Have you ever taken that proximity to power mechanic and just applied it to another game that you were running? Like, have you ever thought, I'm going to do a Rifts one shot at this convention, but I'm also going to apply the PDP rules. So they just won't realize it until the boss fight, and suddenly like the world explodes or something. Like,
I have not, but I like the idea.
Ideas.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's crossed over Beyond the Supernatural with other Palladium games, as is my wont, of course, there's been a Beyond the Supernatural Recon game. Yes, of course there was, but Beyond the Supernatural and Ninjas and Super Spies, I did some games of that and cribbed some notes, even though second edition hadn't been out yet, regarding proximity to power and my own, at that time, very limited understanding of geomancy, and how it would affect chi, and what the possible effects were. And then you came out with second edition. I'm like, and then even more so when Mystic China came out, and I'm like, oh, okay, I was following the thread, you know.
You were, yeah.
One question that came out of our Discord, did you happen to watch any of the television version of Buffy the Vampire, the first season?
Oddly enough, I did not. I was not a big Buffy fan.
It came up in our Discord, and it got me thinking, because they were kind of right on the money, because they crib a lot of the same concepts. Now, I'm not saying they're copying from you, because we've talked about how much of this is pulling and concentrating and refining things that are out in the zeitgeist.
Sure.
But, you know, vampire intelligences, if you kill them, they literally disappear. Throughout the entire series, the Buffy, the butt-kicking vampire slayer, always seems to be more powerful the worse the opponent she's facing is, and until finally they do a whole inversion on that. And so, yeah, it's kind of interesting to see where people who were thinking maybe from the same source material, but or potentially even familiar with your work, definitely took those concepts and moved forward.
It is interesting. So parallel development happens more often than people realize. And again, if you're pulling from, as you said, the same material, and then if you're being affected by whatever's in the zeitgeist around the same time, you're going to come up with some similar ideas. And I was not aware of that at all. I never watched Buffy. It's funny. I liked the original movie, but I never watched Buffy or Angel. I caught only a few episodes of the Supernatural. I never really watched that series either.
I would say that the first and second season of that show are just a straight up Beyond the Supernatural campaign.
Yes, very much so. Like when your investigators are sustaining themselves off of credit card fraud, it screams Beyond the Supernatural to me.
Yep.
That's funny.
So, other than hopefully next year we're going to hear about the magic book, what is there anything else in the future for Beyond the Supernatural?
Yes.
I don't know if you caught it, but he twitched. He twitched big right there.
Okay, well, tell you what. Taking it back a few steps, let's talk about things that do exist.
Okay, cool.
So I understand that there is a collection of adventures.
Yes.
For the first edition. That were very well received.
Yeah, you're talking about Box Nightmares? Yeah.
God, the cover of that is so cool.
Again, another one that like hits it out of the park thematically.
Now, in that particular case, if I remember correctly, I was at a comic book, or not a comic book, either a gaming or a science fiction convention, and that artist had that painting in his, expedition of art, exhibition of art. And I was like, is that available for a book cover? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, that's great. And he goes, I don't remember if he had already painted it or if he wanted to paint the back cover. So the front cover is a gremlin kind of chewing through a wooden box to escape. And the back cover is its tail sticking through one of the slots of the boards. And it was just so great and beautifully rendered. I love that artist. So that's where that came from. And the fact that the creatures in a box gave me the idea for Box Nightmares. And then we also, what I thought was cool, so at the time you had like Weekly World News and the National Enquirer, and they had crazy ass, articles all the time that were just so outrageous. I couldn't believe.
That boy escapes.
Elvis Presley's, seen at Walmart, that kind of thing. And, the end of the world next Tuesday, which is bad for the magazine or the tabloid because it came out weekly. But, all kinds of crazy stuff, demons and ghosts and monsters, Bigfoot seen in, also seen at Walmart. It's just, it was crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And we thought it'd be fun to do a tabloid that came with the book. So the book was one of our few shrink wrapped books, because it came with this tabloid that had all these crazy articles, some of which tied into some of the adventures or gave you extra information or clues about it. And there's some crazy stuff in there, like man gives birth to baby. That the picture of the man was me. There's a picture of my daughter in her goth phase with her head shaved on one side and a mohawk, and all kinds of crazy stuff. And then there's a bunch of UFO photos, and that was fun because we created that. Kevin Long created the UFO out of two microwave bacon grilling pans, and I think some Gundam model kit leftovers where he had like antennas and some weird things that he glued on and then spray painted silver.
That never occurred to me. Is Kevin Long a big Gundam guy?
Oh yeah.
That makes it entire sense to me. Those two ideas never bumped up in my head.
Oh yeah. Gundam, Robotech, Macross, Bubblegum Crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bunch of anime from the late 80s and early 90s.
So, question about Box Nightmare, something I had just noticed on the table of contents page is that a secret Talbot piece?
Oh, yeah, that's an Eric Talbot piece. Yep.
Oh, nice. That's just a nice little touch. I love it. Yeah.
I photocopied that image and used it as a player handout for a game, and it was like the culminating instance where they find it in a child's bedroom, and it's the thing that tips the ground to, oh God, this is actually really happening,
right?
Because it's so perfect.
And seriously, it's in a game like this, right? You read something in the newspaper, can't be true.
Can't be true.
Friend tells you, can't be true. Kid drew a drawing of it. Fuck.
Yeah.
We're screwed. Oh no.
There was another question in the Discord that's also kind of like atmospheric or thematic. I think it's Noxic wanted to ask. We all have our own separate visions as we read, but what was your thematic vision as you were writing this? Was it kind of like Gumshoe Noir, or like Phantom, or more X-Files-y, or what were you? What was your feel? Was it the Venetian blind lines everywhere, or just deep shadows of Phantom, or how are you feeling it?
Kind of a little bit of all those, I think. I mean, we predated X-Files, so that didn't count. But certainly Kolchak, the Night Stalker, certainly film noir, and other elements of horror. That was the feel I was looking for, sort of this dark underbelly of the world that Joe Average doesn't even know exists.
Yeah.
And if he hears about it, goes, oh, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so it's like this, it really is almost like this secret world, this secret war in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Another one from our Discord, from The Bear is Driving, was taking it back to our discussion of how the monsters are truly monstrous and you frequently do have to run away. Did you get much pushback from players at the time when it came out? Like, this game, I just run away a lot. That everything's so powerful.
Actually, no, I didn't. Because I think compared to things like Cthulhu, it's all stuff that with some good dice rolls and the right weapons or knowledge or magic, everything is defeatable. As opposed to, Cthulhu, where, like I said, you're lucky if you just are able to walk away alive, but completely deranged.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I've always tried to center, because like one of the things we've talked about on the podcast before and between each other is the challenges of running investigative centric role-playing games. And I always thought that Beyond the Supernatural, first of all, gave you such a broad selection of skills that you can really attack an investigative problem from a lot of different angles. And the other part being making sure that the clues that you could discover but might not discover are the things that set you up for success when you meet the big bad, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
You're still good at, no matter what, you're going to end up getting what you need to get to the big bad. But if you manage to find the difficult to find clues, it improves your chances of success against the big bad. And
teamwork.
Yeah,
I think that's
absolutely.
the thing too. You mentioned the big bad. In most cases, even the ones that have minions or henchmen, once you get past those, it's one big bad thing. And if it's 4 or 6 or 8 players against that one thing, it's manageable. And I think that comes back from my comic book roots, where you've got teams like the Avengers and the X-Men and the Fantastic Four fighting Doctor Doom or Magneto or that kind of thing, where as long as they work together, they can defeat the big bad.
Yeah, as long as you remember to keep your Nega Psychic in the trunk. Yeah.
Yeah.
When we're talking about film noir, like what's your soundtrack? Okay, what's your soundtrack as you're thinking of this game? Like, is there a lot of saxophone? Is there a lot of jump scare music? Like, where are you? What are you thinking? What's going on in your head?
I think Kevin's a Daft Punk fan.
Well, I listen to a lot of movie scores. I've got probably more than 1,000 CDs, and I like to listen to stuff that doesn't have words, because if it has words, it throws me off.
Agreed.
Trying to write. So a lot of instrumental stuff. John Carpenter is good. Music from a variety of different things can really work. It's funny, sometimes it's stuff that's like counter to the genre that I'm working in. Like, I was working on a Riffs book that was heavily science fiction, and I was really struggling with it, and I couldn't find the thing to get me into the mood. And for some reason, I threw on the score from Magnificent Seven.
Ah,
and I'm like, what the hell, Western?
Yep.
And I threw on a couple of Western themes, a theme from Tombstone and a theme from Wyatt Earp. And they're all different, art and musical performers and conductors. And it's like, yeah, Westerns. I don't know why, but this Western music's getting me into the groove. But no, I listened to a lot of when I was doing the Beyond the Supernatural books. I was listening to a lot of moody, deep, scary kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, because when I read it, I heard saxophone. It was noir in my head.
Well, and I'm a big fan of film noir. I love film noir. And we're talking about something, the first book I wrote, 25 years ago or something? I don't remember exactly what I was listening to. I'm a huge fan of film noir. I love film noir. And saxophones are great. I love the score to Cowboy Bebop because of that. Yeah, I mean, I think I was listening to, certainly when I was listening to the second one, a lot of John Carpenter, a lot of other horror-ish type things. I think some Jerry Goldsmith. Yeah. And some John Williams, The Fury.
Oh, yeah.
I was listening to some of that. And it's just spooky stuff, The Omen.
Oh, yeah.
And Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street and all that kind of stuff.
Atmospheric. Yeah, definitely.
Not Rocky Horror Picture Show.
not Rocky Horror Picture.
Whole different book for that one.
So, what's in the future for Beyond the Supernatural that you can share?
Nothing.
Okay. I'm going to just go find a bridge.
No, that's not true. I already mentioned that we're going to I'm finally going to sit down and do Beyond Arcanum and Tomes Grotesque.
Oh.
I mean, they're books I've wanted to do for a long time. The ideas have been percolating in the back of my head forever. And fans have wanted it for a long, long time, and they've been, remarkably patient. It's time to deliver. But that's part of our mandate, Sean, and my mandate is to get you the books you've been waiting for a long time. In fact, I was surprised because one of our other policies now is not to talk about what's coming, even though we have all kinds of great stuff in the pipeline. And I forget whether it was at an open house or a panel talk. Sean just blurts out that we're finally going to do Tomes. Maybe it was even an interview online with you guys or Legion of Myth or somebody, and it was like, yeah, we're going to be doing Tomes Grotesque and Beyond Arcanum, and I'm like, what?
What?
We just agreed.
That was the plan, but I was shocked that he was revealing it. So we are, and we've got a couple other things in mind for Beyond the Supernatural, like maybe a new, expanded and updated Box Nightmares.
Ooh, yeah, I mean, a lot of people are looking forward to the Arcanum book, but I'm probably in the smaller minority that Tomes Grotesque is what I really want to see, because you put so many little threads in second edition that I really want to see where those are going to go, because I have some private bets going. I have some wants, so I'm really looking forward to that one.
I think you'll really like it too. And the reason the two books were kind of linked is I didn't want to just do just a bunch of new monsters. I wanted to have monsters, and especially if they're greater demons and more powerful beings. I wanted them to also be able to cast magic and use their magic to terrify people. And that's definitely going to be in there. So the two books, bizarrely enough, go pretty hand in hand.
Perfect. I can really see that working out effectively.
And it's going to be fun. I mean, I've got all kinds of, again, I like to look at stuff always and say, how can I make this different? How can I give people something that feels familiar, and then spin it and, give them stuff that they're just not expecting. I open up with something that they think they know. They think they know where it's going, and it's like, pow. Something off the wall. I turn it on its head, some kind of wow factor zinger.
Yeah.
And I have a bunch of cool stuff with that. Because again, there's a lot of weird phenomenon that happens. I mean, even just natural phenomenon. And I forget what it's called because there's a name for it, because I looked it up. But one day I pull into the parking lot of Sam's Club, and there is just a pillar of light. I mean, sunlight. Just straight up and down. And I'm like, wow, that is awesome.
Yep.
And everyone's coming and going. Like, I don't even know if they even see it.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like a beyond a supernatural moment. And I'm thinking, what kind of magic is this? What does a pillar of light do? What is it fighting? Or protecting against? It's just...
I need a speech for this. I need a speech. Stand into it. Proclaim.
Everything gives me ideas.
Yeah.
So, that's stuff like that's going to be in the book. I want to play into horror factor more. So, I mean, what happens if you're up against this creature and you're in its lair and you open up a door and there's a hallway? Like, if I open up my door right now, it's 50 feet to Sean's room. But what if I open that door and the floor is just covered in 12 inches of worms or maggots or centipedes or spiders, and maybe the walls too. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just, what does that do for you? And some people, like people who are afraid of spiders or that particular insect or rodent or whatever, they're going to be big time horror factored out. They're going to have phobia type issues.
Yeah, you get to roll on that table too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And can you just slosh through those things? Are they going to bite? Are they going to attack? Is there...
Why did I wear flip-flops today?
Is it like trudging through mud?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all kinds of cool different effects can happen, and I want to do a bunch of magic type stuff that creates horror. I want to have all kinds of magic abilities and spells that are very much designed to fight the supernatural and demonic. It's going to be good stuff.
Wet
Excellent.
peanut shells. That's what it sounds like and feels like.
Yes.
Wet peanut shells.
Yes, it does.
Ah,
Especially
Yeah,
cockroaches.
exactly.
yeah.
So, any other thoughts?
No, I'm glad to see more for it though.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
You know what? Actually, I do. What makes you come back to it now?
Well, I love Beyond the Supernatural in the setting. I just love it. It's something I wanted to do for a long, long time. What I don't think people understand is, as a business, sometimes you just have to focus on the business elements. And, our fan base looking in doesn't see everything that's going on. Sometimes just personal turmoil or financial turmoil or a combination of things. And then other times you just have to really focus on stuff that's going to make the big bucks because you're a business. You don't have the luxury of saying, you know what, I feel like writing this today. I mean, sometimes you can, but especially with a whole book, you're talking weeks of time going into it. And there's a lot of times where you have to focus on what's going to bring in the money to help keep the company going. And then once that gets stronger or you're in a good cash flow rhythm, you can sit back and go, oh, now I can do the things I really want to write. Like personally, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love writing riffs.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I often say riffs is the game I love to write for, because you can write anything. You can put this kind of stuff in riffs, science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and just combine it all. And it's just, the possibilities are endless, and I love that. But the two games I really love to play the most are Palladium Fantasy and Beyond the Supernatural. Those are my two, I think, personal favorite games. And again, I love playing Rift and Heroes Unlimited and all that stuff. But and actually, Dead Rain is a lot of fun, especially for a quick pickup game or a game at a convention, because people really understand zombies and that whole kind of trope. And then, like all of our other games, Dead Rain takes it into different directions that people aren't expecting.
Yep.
So you can have a lot of fun with that. But Fantasy and Beyond the Supernatural are two of the games that I personally love. They're personally close to my heart. And BTS, I had this big plan for it when the second edition came out in 2005, 2006.
About then.
And it's been stalled all this time. It's like, I need to write this. So we are. I'm going to get a couple of Riffs books out, and the Ninja Turtle Redux edition, which is looking amazing. I mean, truly amazing. And once those are off my plate, it's Beyond the Supernatural, those two books, until they're done. And maybe another book or two. So
I love that.
Excited.
Yeah.
Very excited. And this one did not come through our Discord. It came actually when I was chatting with some friends about the subject of today's cast. And the consensus was that we wanted to extend a heartfelt thank you. That there are no aliens in Beyond the Supernatural. And while I was talking that you were kind of, when Beyond the Supernatural first edition came out, you were kind of sliding in as a kind of forerunner to the early 90s horror boom and role-playing. But so much of that early 90s boom in horror role-playing, if it was this more conspiracy, underground, you're not playing the monster sort of game, there was always aliens. Games Design Workshops, Dark Conspiracy, very much aliens. So many of these things, aliens were tucked in there. And it was like, we have a horror setting that doesn't have little gray men. And so, on behalf of a small hardcore fan base for Beyond the Supernatural, thank you for not having aliens. However, we are not opposed, just to make it clear, because they wanted me to add this too, we are not opposed to horrific entities from other dimensions and creatures faking being aliens to be easier dismissed.
There you go. Actually, I'm going to kind of see those as almost two separate settings.
Mhm.
Like Sean and I have kicked around ideas for a UFO based type game.
Ooh, a Project Moondust game from Kevin. This would be
yeah.
cool.
I like that Project Moondust.
It's an actual. It's one of the later government projects looking into UFOs and such, and it's a continuation of Project Bluebird, Project, et cetera, but it's the one that was the most decentralized out of the military. So there was academia and a lot more individuals, and they actually got engineers involved and stuff. So it's that would be cool. I could see you doing amazing things with that.
Yeah, we have a ton of ideas for all kinds of different things. We don't want to talk about them because if they never come to pass, or if it's they don't happen for 10 years, we want people going, where is it? We got plenty of that already. So we're trying to avoid that. Hence our policy of not discussing new projects until they're either half written or about to go to the printer.
That's a good plan.
Yeah. I mean, especially in this day and age with all of the things that are going on with logistics worldwide, a cost of goods fluctuating wildly for the printing industry. I 100% endorse keeping your mouth shut until you can deliver.
Well, and something that people don't talk about is the printing industry has been getting increasingly consolidated, where there's like a big conglomerate who owns like at least 50 or 60% of all the printers, maybe more at this stage. Our McNaughton & Gunn, a printer that we loved and worked with for 40 years, was bought up by this big conglomerate, and they basically took McNaughton & Gunn apart, and the quality of their work we're not impressed with. Yeah. So that left us looking for printers. And, the digital revolution is awesome in more ways. I'm not even just talking about digital books, but I'm talking about digital printing. It really makes things flexible, but it's also kind of inconsistent. I think it's still kind of a new technology. So we're running into printers who specialize in digital printing that their quality is inconsistent. It's got different issues. Sometimes the ink isn't as black and beautiful as it should be. We have weird bindery issues sometimes. I've got probably a dozen Rifts Federation of Magics that are in our Christmas grab bag pile because it's slightly defective, because the spine is kind of a little bit onto the front of
warp over.
Most people won't care, but I don't feel like it's something I can send to a store or send to someone who's spending $25 on that book. But for a Christmas surprise package where people expect slightly damaged or little defects, okay, we can put them there. That works great. But it's been really hard getting good quality, affordable printing here in the United States.
Yeah.
We've never really printed in Canada. I mean, here in Canada, China, here and there, certain projects have been printed in China, but for the most part, it's been 99% the USA. And we're finding it difficult to print in the damn USA. Also, a lot of printers are being specialized. So, like, we have a printer that does beautiful work, but they specialize in color. Stuff like that just happens.
Yeah.
So we're going to be printing more in China, and that it comes with a whole new logistical set of things, because it no matter how you cut it, it takes 4 months to get a book from China.
If you're lucky.
So we
If you're
plan
lucky.
way in advance, and then that's assuming there's not going to be, problems getting through the Suez Canal, or there's not going to be dock strikes when it hits East Coast or the West Coast. And
We see what you do is you ship them here to Portland, and we'll ship them to you, because then you don't have to go through the Suez. No Houthi pirates in the way.
so there's just lots of different elements, and the same thing of writing books. It just when a great example is when Kathy passed. I mean, it was totally unexpected, and she's my beautiful sweetheart. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't come to the office for 2 months straight.
Yeah.
I just didn't have it. I had nothing. I was just, it was just awful. And I'm still not 100%. It's 5 months later, and it's still hard. And it's hard to write when your heart is being torn in two, and there's just other things you have to deal with. But you do the best you can, and you focus on other things, other maybe less creative avenues to keep things rocking and rolling, and you do. But thankfully, I love what I do, and I do it with people I love. So we're getting back in the saddle. Earlier this afternoon, I ran a game for Sean, his daughter, and our warehouse guy, Caleb, fantasy game. And it kind of play tests an aspect of Jens Sloth Expeditions.
Ooh.
And it went very well. They loved it. So now you just got to sit down and finish that adventure and finish the rest of the damn book. But I'm motivated to do that, and I had fun. I had fun running the game. So
Good to hear. Yeah.
Good to hear. Final thoughts.
Final thoughts?
We get 2 more books. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm happy as hell.
I have absolutely loved this interview. Obviously, I'm a huge Beyond the Supernatural fan, as is blatantly obvious. It's one of my favorite Palladium sections. Thank you again for creating it and tending it well. One of the problems I've seen in other parts of the RPG industry that Palladium did not fall into with Beyond the Supernatural is whenever, like, horror as a genre kind of goes in cycles, and other publishers will sometimes try to jam out quick projects whenever they see the horror cycle coming to a peak again.
Yeah.
And you never did that. And there may have been other reasons for why you didn't do that, but the fact that you didn't opportunistically pursue that, I've always appreciated.
Oh, thanks. No, we try not to let stuff like that really impact us. We're always looking to do quality books, always looking to do books that people will enjoy, and we do it at our own pace. I mean, a great example, and we probably talked about it during the Heroes Unlimited interview, is because I was a comic book guy, everyone assumed I'd be coming out, my first game would be a superhero book.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. And then neither was the second, and neither was the third. And people are like, are you insane? There's like, by the time Heroes Unlimited came out, there had been something like 20 superhero games, maybe more. And they're like, it's too late. You missed it. And I've never fallen for that. I sit back and look. Quality is quality. Cream does rise to the top. People will find it if it's good. I'm not going to be forced into doing something quick just to capitalize on a trend. And 30 years later, Heroes Unlimited is one of the very few superhero games still in the market.
Still going, yeah.
Yep.
So obviously that didn't hurt us, waiting to do it. I try not to let those kind of factors affect us. Although, it's nice when things kind of fall together, come out and work out where, some new hot thing came out, and so people love horror again. And, here's the new edition of Beyond the Supernatural. Those kind of coincidences. Cool.
I mean, you're not to be held to task over new editions. When you look at what other game companies are doing, your new editions are just fine. You've done it once, maybe on some properties. You know,
Kevin, any final thoughts that you want to put out in the world about Beyond the Supernatural or anything else?
Yeah, buy it. You'll love it.
Yes, you will. Kevin, thanks again for joining us. Thank you again for bringing Beyond the Supernatural to all of us. And we look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Real soon.
Real
My
soon.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Yep, happy to do it, guys.
Yeah.
excellent.
I'm loving this journey.
Yeah, I enjoyed these conversations. They're very good. And by the way, at Gen Con, I had numerous, probably dozens of people come up to me and say, I love these interviews that you're doing.
Oh, excellent.
Excellent.
Hell
Perfect.
yeah.
Well,
That's
folks,
so good to hear.
Yep.
be looking for another interview with Kevin soon.
Yeah.
And thank you for joining us once again here on the Glitterbois. Join us in our Discord, and maybe next time you too can get a question put to Kevin.
Thanks for listening, folks.
Thanks.
You've been listening to The Glitterbois, a Palladium Books fan podcast. Glitterbois, Rifts, the Megaverse, and all other such topics are the property of Kevin Siembieda and Palladium Books. Please buy all their stuff and help keep them in print and making more games. You can order directly at palladiumbooks.com, and their entire catalog is available digitally at Drive-Thru RPG as well. Our opening music is 8-Bit Bass and Lead by Furby Guy from freesound.org. This closing music is Caravana by Philip Gross, available at freemusicarchive.org. All sound effects used are self-made or acquired via Creative Commons Zero license. If you like what you have heard, find us on Twitter and Facebook as The Glitterbois. That's BOIS. And check us out online at breakfastpuppies.com/glitterboys. And also join us on the Breakfast Puppies Network Discord at breakfastpuppies.com/discord. And if you want to help us out, please spread the word and help us build a community. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time.